Hi, thanks for being here, especially, and thanks, Carl, for the introduction, and everybody for being here. I know it's right after lunch, you want to take a nap, and you came instead to learn about AI and statistics, so thanks. I'm Sean. I'm going to talk to you today about the science and statistics of animal testing. As Carl said, I'm a statistician at Oregon Health and Science University. Also, just a quick disclaimer that these are my opinions based in science and research. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions of OHSU. In fact, they probably will disagree with me on a number of things I'm going to talk about today. So I have a few presentation goals. First, the main one, I want us to be able to identify two pervasive narratives about animal research. And just so everyone knows, when I started making this talk, I started with 5, so if you want to know some more, chat with me after. But I only have 15 minutes, so we're going to talk about 2. The next goal is for us to discuss the scientific and statistical evidence surrounding these narratives. And, be aware that I'm a scientist, and science doesn't always tell us what we want to hear. It's possible that some of the things that I'm going to talk about today might be difficult to hear. But again, everything that are in my slides that I'm talking about is supported by the aggregated science over the past 100 years. And then finally, I want to provide some practical tips for how to use available data and scientific knowledge to advance advocacy goals, particularly in the realm of animal testing. So let's get started. The first narrative I want to talk about is that results from animal studies translate to humans. This narrative is the primary reason why animal testing is conducted. The idea, propagated by scientists and generally accepted by the public, is that if we discover something in animals, we will find the same thing in humans. And I'm going to discuss why this narrative may not be fully supported by the published science. Now, before I get into all of that, what do I mean by translation? Because we commonly think of translation in the form of language, right? So if I'm in Germany and I hire a translator to help me get around, I want the things that I tell the translator to mean the same thing in German as they do in English, right? So if I need 2 tickets, I want to say, hello, I need 2 tickets, I want the translator to say, hallo, ich brauche 2 Fahrkarten bitte, right? I want them to say, it should mean the same thing in one language as it does in the other. In research, translation means that what we do or find in one context is the same, or roughly the same, as what we find in another context. That reality about humans is essentially the same as reality about mice, or dogs, or monkeys, or whoever they may be testing on. That's the hope, is that humans equals animals. That's why animal testing is done. But there's also bad translations, right? So a bad or a failed translation might look something like this. If I need 2 tickets, and then the translator just says hello, they've missed the nuance and the prominent meaning of my words when they just say that, right? And so in research, a bad translation simply means that what we find in an animal study is different than what we find in a human study. And that when we try to understand something about humans, in humans, by studying animals, we end up missing all the nuances of human and animal individualism, that's a better one, and the differences in their respective realities. So this statistic is particularly notable. Between 80 to 95% of drugs found safe and effective in animals have failed to translate in humans. And just a quick note, in statistics, we expect to find 5% of the time effects just by random chance. So not only are the majority of these studies just not translating, they're not working, we're finding different things between animals and humans, the ones that we do find that have some support may only be due to natural randomness, just happenstance, that luck, blind luck, that we found this translation, and nothing actually meaningful about the intervention itself. In 50 to 70 years, in the past 50 to 70 years of biomedical research, we have yet to find any reliable treatments for stroke, osteomyelitis, head trauma, heart attack, cancer, asthma, so many more. Diseases, psychological disorders, other ailments. The science is pretty clear that when we try to study these treatments and others in animals, they're not going to work in humans. And it ends up being a complete waste of time, as well as the ethical considerations. The vast majority, in the range of 90 to 99% of treatments around today, exist because of scientists finding something that worked with humans that didn't work with animals.
Can you say that again?
90 to 99% of treatments that exist today exist because of scientists finding something in humans that didn't work in animals. And I mentioned that I might say some things that are hard to hear, and so that although I just got done talking about the very low translation rates, and we don't see enough of those, there are cases in medical history where studies have translated. For example, using antibiotics in heart infection, to treat heart infections. Interestingly, colon cancer prevention tactics such as taking aspirin or eating wheat bran. And there's some burgeoning research to suggest that there's some increasing translation rates between pigs and humans. I'll come back to this last point a little bit later, and you should know that these aren't the only successful ones. I'm just selecting a few out there. There are other, let's say, successful translations. To be quite frank, I have statistical concerns with a number of these so-called successful translations, which is why I refer to them as rough. But these are the kinds of studies that your opponents are going to cite. They're going to talk about these kinds of translations, even though they might be happening by random chance, they happen. And they're going to cite these as examples why animal research is helpful and why it translates. So it's important to know and understand these studies, the individual studies, as well as the aggregate systems and the flaws of these studies and the systems of animal testing. Individual study flaws, like, for example, in the studies looking at the heart infection treatments using antibiotics, researchers didn't find any differences between the animal models and the cell model studies in regards to efficacy. So we really didn't actually even need the animal studies because they found the exact same thing. And then there are systemic flaws in animal research translation. Aggregate science shows a statistically unpredictable range of results between animal and human studies. And importantly, with no real understanding of why. 0 to 100% is the range of translation rates. And that can be a little bit difficult to understand what that means practically speaking, but imagine you're at the hospital and you're about to undergo surgery. And you ask the surgeon, hey doc, what's the science say about if this surgery is going to work? And the surgeon says, well, depending on who you read, it's either going to work every single time, or it's never going to work. Is that something that you'd be willing to, bet your time on, bet your money on, bet your life on? No. It's not something that you would want to do any of those things. It's also important to know that any known translation rate, even the successful translations I mentioned, are upwardly biased. Up to a third of animal studies, over 30% of them may not get published because they don't find any significant effect. And we have no idea what those studies might say for humans. Animal research journals, note this, will not publish null findings. They will not. They will reject it outright. And studies that are looking at aggregate translation rates are decreasingly likely to account for this publication bias. So when someone tries to even argue that maybe someone's arguing a higher statistic or a higher proportion of animal studies translating, that's an overestimate. It's always an overestimate because of what we call the file drawer problem, that these non-significant null studies are just going into the file drawer and then never spoken of again. So let's move on to narrative number 2, that animal studies are necessary, right? That these methods are the best and sometimes only way to study certain phenomena. Indeed, many if not most of the biomedical procedures and health recommendations that we have today originated in some way, shape, or form from animal studies. And even though the results may not have translated, they likely catalyzed research that was then done in humans, and then we found something in humans that was meaningful. So things like antibiotics in general, like penicillin, modern vaccines, surgery, dentistry, nutrition. These are the examples that people are going to give when describing the necessity of animal testing. That, the only way that we can know how nutrition impacts our longevity is to study an animal throughout their lifespan. But in each and every case like this, I would argue it wasn't necessary. Penicillin, for example, was an accidental translation just because of the species that Florey decided to choose for his tests. If he had instead gone with guinea pigs and tested penicillin on guinea pigs, all of the guinea pigs would have died because it is poisonous to guinea pigs. And then we wouldn't have penicillin today, most likely. Or it would have been delayed probably about 30, 50 years. And I want to briefly talk about a recent case study that I find particularly concerning. So a few months ago, or a couple of months ago, scientists successfully, quote unquote, transplanted a pig's kidney into a human, a genetically modified pig's kidney into a human. In my original slides for this, in my notes, I included that human is still alive today. That is not correct anymore. That human died last week, which makes their success rate 0. Every human that they have tried to transplant a genetically modified pig kidney into has died within a couple of months. But people are still going to use this. They call this success. They're using this as examples of reasons why we need to continue testing on animals. In fact, the scientists in this article are quoted as saying that this could save the 100,000 humans currently on the donor list. And make no mistake that what they're saying is that they're willing to kill 100,000, 200,000, 1,000,000, however many pigs it takes to save those 100,000 humans, even though there's no scientifically valid reason, there's no defendable statistic that says that what they're doing makes any sense. But that equation sits okay with the status quo. And this isn't new. Scientists have been publishing on this for years, for decades, that it's just too important to drop, right? That, okay, this all is pretty blurry, you can't see those, but trust me, they're saying it's too important to drop. They've been saying it for years. And a lot of times they'll even acquiesce. They'll say yeah, the stats aren't supportive of this, but we still need to do it because there's not any other way that we can study these things. But again, case studies like the kidney transplant and other instances of successful translation cannot be harnessed in any scientifically valid way. Many people argue that not only is animal testing not necessary, it inhibits scientific progress and can even harm humans. An asthma treatment, I can't pronounce the name of the drugs, isopropyl something. It was administered in the UK in the 70s after successful animal trials, and then it ended up killing over 3,000 humans. And thousands, if not millions, of humans die every year because of delayed treatments due to animal testing requirements. And ultimately tradition, because that's really what it comes down to. It consumes resources that could be used to make biomedical research more ethical, efficient, and scientifically defendable. And here, this is why animal testing isn't necessary. Because we already have alternative methods that exhibit similar or better translation rates with humans compared to animal research. We now have the capacity to grow viable human organs in the lab. These are human organs based in human genes. The only reason that we feel the need to breed a genetically modified pig to slaughter for their organs, to put in a sick human, is because that's what scientists are used to. Organ-on-chip technology can be used for any of the examples that I just showed you earlier. And we also have what are called in silico methods. And in silico methods are known kind of as computational biology. So for those of you here for the AI portion, this is my little bit of AI that I'm going to talk about before Sam gets his full AI stuff. But yeah, we can use AI and computer modeling to ask and answer genetic, physiological, drug questions, psychology questions. And for almost a decade, we've already had various models that translate to humans at astronomically higher rates than animal studies. So we really need to be putting funding into people like Sam who are developing AI that can be leveraged to ultimately replace animal research. So how can we use all this aggregate information in general? Well, one, inform policy, okay? Lobby for changes not only to scientific regulations, but funding source interests. The FDA Modernization Act made it so that people don't need to test on animals, which was a huge win, but we haven't seen much change in the amount of animal testing that's been going on still. And I don't see 3.0 making actually too much of a difference either if you read the language of the law. So talk to your congresspeople, your political staffers, the political staffers. Let them know that not just that the science is bad, it's a complete waste of money. Frame it in economic terms, right? Almost half of the studies that NIH funds are animal studies, which translates to roughly $200 billion based on the success rate of animal studies. That's being squandered. That's taxpayer money. That's being used to just kill animals that have absolutely no bearing on human health, which was the whole point in the first place. We should divert those funds to alternative methods like organ on a chip and AI, not pig kidney transplants. And just a shout out to Carl and Futility, who are about to do some research on how to communicate with political staffers. So I'm really excited about that, and I'd love to merge the info that they learn with the science that we have to change our policies at local, state, national levels. And then finally, I think we should also start building bridges between advocacy and science. And this might not sit well with a lot of you, but I think that we should start building research programs around animal researchers. I think that we need to study them. I think that we need to understand why they're hesitant. Because they are going to be the most hesitant to adopt and the most vocally against adopting new policies and that replace and reduce animals in research. So we should work with them to understand